Hey, Robert.
Yeah.
So, last few shows we've been talking about ingenuism as it applies to our personal lives. And we've talked a lot about connection and failure and learning. And I want to dig a little deeper on the learning side into one particular aspect of the learning, and then really delve into a particular application of this. And we'll see where that takes us. So, we talked about learning as being a form of connection. That is, we learn from other people. But that's not, we learn from other people, from the achievements of the past, from books. All of that is connection on the internet, from courses on YouTube. I mean, there's a million forms, but it's all, in a sense, us in a not in a passive way, in an active way, but absorbing information and integrating knowledge that already exists. Beyond that, though, there is the origination of new knowledge at whatever level one creates it, right? So you're just
Yes, I think there is.
so we have two types in a sense. One is where we're integrating stuff that already exists, that other people have taught us, and that's work. I mean, it's not I think the conventional perception of it's just passive and it just hits us. You actually have to work to make it your own. But then there's the second type of where you go out there and actually take this body of knowledge that you've already got and apply it in a new way, or integrate it in a new way, and discover new knowledge yourself.
Yes. Do you have a question?
I thought you were going to riff on that.
Well, I think that the most basic learning is what you start with in kindergarten, which is someone else gives you the questions and then someone else gives you the answers. And then as you progress, you move to where someone else gives you the questions, and then your job is to go out and find the answers. And that's a valuable form of learning. It's learning that active process of going out and finding information that you need. But you already have the questions. You already know what it is that you're looking for, what you're trying to answer.
Also, there's a referent for the answer too, right? Because there's a right or wrong answer in the sense of what you're researching, what you're looking for.
And it, whether it's actually the right or wrong answer, there's an authority who's giving you the question, who then is going to tell you whether the answer is right or the answer is useful. And then you get into your job and your boss is saying we need to do these things, and then you go out and you do it, and then they tell you whether what you did was sufficient or not. So you're basically continually being given questions and then continually being graded on your answers. And that is a very basic form of learning, and it's very valuable, and it contributes particularly when you're in groups, but it breeds a natural sort of reward punishment system where you're looking for other people's questions, and then you're looking to find the right answer, and then you somehow win. And that's like a blast of pleasure. And so a lot of people stop there. But that's not really where progress happens, because at that point you're just generating insights. You're creating answers. You're accessing knowledge that's already known. You're connecting it to yourself, but then you're not doing anything with it. And it's easy to get enamored with your insights. Like you have a new thought and it seems so amazing, and you want to go out and tell everybody because you've discovered something. It's like, I found gold. But what's really the big payoff, but is quite a bit more work and requires a lot more exploration and failure, is when you discover something, both either a question or a question and an answer, or an answer to an existing question, but where there is no answer, where you discover something that's completely novel. And that is a critical part of ingenuism. Our model is that connection and learning create progress. If you're not connected, in a world where people are not connected, people can learn a lot, but progress is going to be very slow. The level of connection wouldn't be zero because you're always connected to yourself, but it would be very small. So progress would be very slow, versus a world where we're all connected like today, and we can all feed off of each other's insights and build on the knowledge that already exists. We all don't have to start at square one. But there's also this learning piece, and learning is in that model, it's really novel insights. It's creating things that didn't exist before. And without that, you don't get any progress. If we're all just sharing information that we all already know, but making no new insights with that information, you would literally have no progress. It's a tautology. So that type of learning is super important, but it's not what we start with when we first begin learning, and it's not, there's no natural transition to it. And so what we want to talk about is, how do you make sure that you are applying your ingenuity not just to the existing body of knowledge, but you're applying it in ways that allow you to actually create new knowledge, new useful insights.
Yeah, no, and it's how do you grow in that sense, and how do you utilize that? And so I just read this book. It's a pretty popular book in on healthcare by a guy named Peter Attia. He's got a big podcast and all of this. And I think one of the things he talks about, which I think is really the theme of kind of what he talks about, is we've got this perspective on healthcare that is basically focused on, I think, mostly this idea of connection. That is, we kind of know how to treat the existing stuff. We know how to treat diseases. Now, that's a huge advancement, because 50 years ago, 60 years ago, we didn't know as much as we know today. But we know a lot about how to treat various diseases less effectively, more effectively. And almost our entire healthcare system is built around treating disease. And you get sick, you go to the doctor. And Attia's proposing what he's calling healthcare 3.0. And it's, why don't we start orienting our healthcare system around prevention rather than treatment? Now, maybe we don't understand enough yet to really do this well. But if we start orienting ourselves, we'll learn more. If we start thinking about it more, we'll learn more, rather than just the latest, greatest treatment for cancer. How do we prevent cancer? How do we prevent it from ever happening? The whole orientation of research now shifts to, what can you do when you're young? It's almost impossible to get young people to do anything long term, but what do you do when you're young, so that you never get into a position where you have to use all this body of knowledge that exists in order to treat you? How do we get feedback on what we do health-wise to orient us towards a healthier lifestyle? So how do we pay attention to the right things so that we become, in a sense, original learners about our own body, about our own mechanisms, applying kind of the generalized knowledge that exists out there to ourselves. So I found that super interesting, and combined with my like of gadgets and electronic stuff, I now have a bunch of, I now have not only an Apple Watch, which gives me all kinds of healthcare information, but also something called the Whoop, which gives me additional information. And I'm trying to make heads or tails of it because it's complicated, but trying to serve this process of prevention rather than just getting sick and having it treated.
Well, it's complicated is a great way to segue, because it's not at all a shock how our healthcare system has evolved. Because if you think about, how do you get to a point where you're finding new questions and answering unanswered questions and answering these new questions, you need to be doing things. It takes action. You can sit around and think about theoretical physics and create interesting insights, but then you have to go out and test them before you can actually move the theory forward in a way that you're confident with. And so there's always this element of doing, and it's not learning by doing, although it kind of is. It's really learning and doing. You're learning and you're doing things, and the doing is generating the next round of learning. This isn't a linear process at all. And for healthcare, it's a lot easier to build that regime inside of areas where people are sick, because then it's very well defined. These people have this disease, and we can do things and then see who gets better and see who doesn't. And that's the essence of how we develop new treatments, is we find out what works on average, because we have a large number of people are sick. And it's why it's very hard to find treatments for rare diseases, because you don't have the option or the ability to actually do things. Now that may be changing as we get more computing power. You can simulate things a lot better. You can get much better. You can do different things than you used to be able to do, and that's going to lead to more learning.
I mean,
But when you
we just
flip it
start changing
around,
people's genes, I mean, and learn from what happens to that. So there's some
exactly. So
amazing
you
things
look
coming
at
down the pipe.
exactly, and that's exactly where you look when you flip it around and you say, okay, now I want to learn how to avoid something.
And
So
I
how
think
do
you
I
have to go through the first step to get to the second step. I don't think healthcare could have evolved the other way around.
there's I have nothing going on about how healthcare is done, or I mean I have a lot going on about the details, but the fact that it evolved this way is I agree, it's pretty much inevitable because it's the easier questions to generate and then answer. Flipping it around and trying to generate answers to questions of how do you stop something from happening, how do you create the negative of something is much harder, because then you have to look at everyone who doesn't have the disease and figure out what is common amongst these people. And so not having insight into genetics, not having insight into people's health histories, into people's actions over the course of their lives makes this really, really difficult, but it's also very, very important. And we can contribute both to our own success and to this body of knowledge by doing what you're doing, which is by starting to explore what works for us and what makes a difference for us. And it's extremely interesting to think about where we might be in 20 years as more people are collecting data on themselves under different environments, under different circumstances, with making different decisions, because you might actually be able to answer some of these questions.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a super exciting time in this field because we've reached a certain amount of knowledge, a certain critical mass of knowledge that we can actually start making decisions. We don't know, we're far from knowing it all. We're just at the beginning of the process, but we're now, because of the tools of modern medicine, because we have enough understanding of the kind of the microbiology or whatever they call it, of the cell structure, DNA, genes. We have the beginnings of knowledge there, or quite a bit of knowledge there. And now we have these tools that allow us to measure, we can look inside the human body with an MRI, which is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. We can do a brain scan. We can get really sophisticated blood tests that even a couple of decades ago, and now we know what they mean because we've run these blood tests a gazillion times, and we kind of know the correlations. We know what relates to what, and because we know the microbiology, we know the causal relationships. So we just know the stats. We know we think we know what's happening inside. And then you've got these trackers, and when you combine all of that, I mean, right now it's the best time ever to be if somebody told me, a friend of mine told me, it's the best time ever to be in your 60s. And that's true. But in 20 years, it's going to be even so much better to be in your 60s because they'll have so much more information about doing this. And of course, if you start doing this in your 30s, your 60s are going to be much better, hopefully, if you apply it. But it's amazing how much knowledge is out there. It's amazing how many tools we have to keep track of everything. And then in our lives, we can change the food we eat. I mean, you went through this thing where you had some allergies and you tested and you can actually find out the cause and figure out a way to deal with it and improve your life significantly.
That's a really important point. And I think it actually unfortunately applies to traditional curative medicine as well. I mean, we have a lot of information, but we're learning, we're always learning more, and we're learning that some of the things we thought before weren't true. It's until you have a full biological understanding of something, it's easy to make bad assumptions. My favorite story is always the scurvy one, where the scurvy was cured and then the cure was forgotten multiple times because there was this assumption that, well, okay, well, so probably everyone knows that scurvy is caused by lack of vitamin C, and you get vitamin C from eating fresh meat, fresh vegetables, fresh foods. So on ships where there were no fresh foods, sailors would get scurvy, and eventually it's fatal. So it's a really bad disease, and it was impacting the entire world because ships were how the world was connected at the time. And then they discovered that lemon juice solves the problem of scurvy. So if everybody drinks a tablespoon of lemon juice every day, nobody gets scurvy. And scurvy was cured. And then somebody decided it would be easier to use limes because you get the limes in the Caribbean than to keep using lemons. And of course, limes are so much like lemons. I mean, they're basically lemons. Well, it turns out that limes don't have as much vitamin C, and the vitamin C they have gets destroyed in the process of making and storing the lime juice. It reacts with the copper, I think, is what I remember. So suddenly scurvy's back, and suddenly no one understands it because we're still doing what we did. So maybe the gods are angry with us or something. And then they only discovered it because it turns out guinea pigs are one of the few animals like primates can't manufacture their own vitamin C. And it turns out if you give guinea pigs a non-fresh diet, and you can experiment on them, you can actually do the things that you would never do with people.
Yep.
And so they figured out if you give guinea pigs lemon juice, they don't get scurvy, and if you give them lime juice, they do. And then they found that it was something in there. So what's in lemon juice that's not in lime juice? And they discovered vitamin C. And that's where we are in all of medicine, is we think we know what's going on. We're still trying to figure out what's going on. We know some treatments are effective on average, but no treatment, well, not very few treatments are widely effective across the entire population, or even the majority of the population.
And we even know why today, because we know that people have different genomes. We know genes that turned on and off, and some people have them on, some people have them off, some people have different genes. So, but and of course the promise has always been this idea of personalized medicine, that they would take the genome and do that. And it's so I signed up for this thing called Health Nucleus, and that's one of the things they do. Now they do it at the level they can do it today, which is so. But I would just talk to my doctor, and she said, "Oh, when you come in next time, we're going to rerun your genomic test, because there are 500 new genes that we know are correlated with certain diseases, and we'll be able to get an even better picture this year than we got last year. And next year, we'll get even." So it's so they do the scans, they do the genes, they do the blood tests. They don't yet take my Whoop data and integrate it into that, but that's maybe the next phase. They have you put on a glucose monitor. So I wear a glucose monitor for 2 weeks every year. And that's I find it fun because I like information and I like to know what's going on. But then you just experiment with foods. You just try all my favorite restaurants, and I try different foods, and to see which one spikes my glucose and which one doesn't. And it's often surprising things that you wouldn't expect, again, because we don't fully understand the processes behind them. And then you integrate that. So there's this amazing ability now to get a lot of data, start integrating it just at the beginning. But the hope is that one day you'll really be able to get a full body scan, in a sense of they'll scan everything and they'll know everything, and you'll be able to know exactly what to do to live the healthiest, longest life possible.
And the health is something that is probably the most important of all of the areas of life that we might talk about improving, because it determines everyone's length of life and quality of life. And health is hard to evaluate, because if you're talking about long-term outcomes, you just don't know. Like we don't know if what you're doing right now, how big an impact it will have. So this is why the impact of the body of knowledge will mushroom. It'll explode over time, because as we learn more, then the insights become more effective and more people want to try them, and then we learn even more, and there's this really strong network effect.
We're each doing original learning, in a sense, originating new data, and it gets embedded into this massive quantity of data, and and hopefully there are really qualified people out there integrating it all. So
there definitely will be. And it's funny because you're very much the gadget guy and I'm very much not. So
yep.
What I have done is all just very, 1800s. So what we did was a challenge of taking allergens out of the diet and then introducing them back in. And I found out I have been, probably for a long time, sensitive to milk products, which was a tragedy to find out because now I don't eat cow cheese, but then I also discovered sheep's cheese. So and how I did that was I tried goat cheese because I first of all, I read about, I'm not going to be able to drink milk.
Yep.
And so I can't have cheese, except there are other types of cheeses. And so I read some, and goat cheese and sheep cheese are a lot less, they're less likely to trigger an allergy reaction in most people who are sensitive to milk. And so I tried goat cheese, which was much easier to find. I never ate enough to really test it because I don't like it. So I learned I don't want to eat goat cheese. And
I'm
then
not surprised. I'm not surprised.
but sheep's cheese is quite good, and I figured out now kind of how much sheep's cheese I can eat. And I did the same thing with ice cream. It turned out that I can eat 4 bites of ice cream, 4 small bites of ice cream. So it's before I get in trouble. So I can only eat 3 small bites of ice cream.
Sheep milk ice cream.
No, I need expensive creamy ice cream. Because what I found out is that cream, I can eat butter. I mean, I don't eat a stick of butter. I don't know if that would be a problem, but it seems to be something in the protein, in the solids of the milk. But I don't have a biological model for it. So it's all been exploring, and I'm basically satisfied with where I am. I miss pizza. That's really the only thing, because there's no cheese that melts and gives you pizza like mozzarella cheese does. But otherwise, I suspect that this is a lot healthier for me. But the thing that I've mostly done in my life is just try to pay attention to, when am I feeling better? When am I more effective?
Yep.
Am I happier with my weight? When am I happier with my energy level? And I've discovered things that make me hungry. It's a bizarre, but I think if you pay attention, everyone over the age of 30 will notice that there are foods that when you eat them, you actually end up hungrier than you started. And luckily, they tend to be foods that aren't very good for you anyway. So at one point, I did the no cellophane diet. If it came in cellophane, if the bag was crinkly, then I wouldn't eat it. Yep. And that worked really well. And then I got older, and now it's changed. And as I have actually paid attention and kept track of it, it's not just what I eat that moment, it's also what I've been eating the last few days. So if I'm eating extremely well, then I have a lot more resilience. Versus if I've been eating, I was in Tahoe for a friend's birthday party, and I can't say that I ate particularly well, and I was drinking, and well, now it seems like everything I eat makes me hungry, which is hugely frustrating. Unless you were, I guess, trying to gain weight, and I'm certainly not. And that's the exact opposite of what my experience with milk. Before I knew I was allergic to something in milk, I would drink a lot. I mean, I literally drank milk. I was one of those weird adults who drank glasses of milk. And it bothered me, but it bothered me sort of on a chronic low level. And now I've gotten that out. But if I were to drink a glass of milk, it would take me out. If 8 hours later, it would completely take me out for 8 hours. Yeah. So it's hard to predict these things. They have to be discovered. And that's a big part of what applying Ingenuism to your individual life is going to be, is being committed to trying things, paying close attention to whatever feedback that you get, and then working from that feedback to try something else, to start really figuring out what is worth it and what is not. So I imagine that, you go to your favorite restaurant and the glucose monitor spikes. That doesn't mean you stop going to that restaurant, period.
Yep.
It might mean you go less. It might
order
mean you
different things. You might order less. You might just once in a while say, okay, I'm going to splurge and my glucose will go up.
That's it. Yeah. Yes.
As long as it bounces back down, you're okay usually. But yes, no, I mean, I discovered this bag of plantain chips was the one thing that would cause my glucose just to skyrocket within 20 minutes. And it was interesting because I'd never thought it's plantain chips. They're salty. They're not even sweet. But of course, they contain sugar, and just the combination for some reason works that way on me. Doesn't work that way on other people. And the interesting thing is, I think, so I like the gadgets, and I've got all the gadgets and the measuring everything. But at the end of the day, if you don't do what you do, that is, if you don't monitor yourself and you don't think about how am I feeling, then it's used. All of these gadgets are useless because, you know, the only person who can personalize it really is you. And at the end of the day, it's all about how you feel and what you can do and the kind of the level of energy you have and things like that matter. And we still can't quite measure that. We'll get there.
I think I'm gonna have to try the gadgets though, because I'm leaving out or at least one, I'm leaving out a big area of potential learning. And, you know, without trying it, there's no way to know if it would be valuable. It might be extraordinarily valuable. And I think over time, the gadgets, to use the term we've decided to use, they're going to get better.
Yeah.
They're going to get more sophisticated. They're going to get more accurate. They're going to get cheaper. They're like everything is going to improve. So it's not necessarily missing the early adoption years are a big deal. But at some point, anything that gives you insight into what you should be eating, how much exercise you should be getting, how you can sleep better, all of the things that we know are related to health, we just don't know exactly how they're related or how to optimize them. You've got to start experimenting. And because it'll take a while, you don't want to wait until you're sick and then say, okay, well, now how should I change my diet? And that circles back to where you started, is if we all were to take on how do I impact my health today and what can make my health the way it occurs to me, the way I can measure it, the way I can quantify it, make it better today. How big an impact will that have on me when I'm 80, and not just how long I live, but how long I'm ambulatory and how long I'm pain-free, or fill in the blank. And then that'll be the point where it'll be our kids who will be able to say, gosh, I should have done this with certainty. And it'll be their kids that'll be able to actually do those things.
Yes.
And
you're gonna love this book by Peter Attia, because he says, oh wait, so the standard for what works and what doesn't should be what you want to be able to do easily in your 80s or 90s. Right? So he said, for a lot of people, that's play with my grandkids and pick up a grandchild and carry the groceries up a flight of stairs and get up off the floor without any problem. Just stand up, which is not easy, and I know a lot of people in the 80s and 90s now, and it sucks. If you're not in good shape, it sucks. And his view is you want to live well for as long as you can and then die quickly, because the process of dying is really awful. If when you get old, if you die, it could take years and it can be awful. So the point is to maximize the amount of time living well. And he's got something called the Centennial Olympics. What are the things you would have to do as a centenary, whatever, to be able to cope, to be able to live well? And so it's a really, I think.
So you're gonna have to explain what the Century Olympics are, or whatever. What is that idea?
That is, pick up your kid, pick up a child and carry them.
Right.
Carry 2 bags of groceries up 3 flights of stairs. It's the practical things you will it's the developing, being able to live the kind of life you want to live when you're 100. That's the Olympics. It's not it, and it turns out that to do those things, you have to be exceptional, because most people who make it to that age can barely walk, can barely do that. So you have to view it as an Olympics. That is, you have to shoot for being at the top form as a 100-year-old. These are the things you can do. You're not going to be able to do what you did when you're 40. That's just not anytime soon, anyway. But so you set the standards and you target them for what is really useful and meaningful.
You made the point of that it's hard to get young people to do anything, even for themselves, because when you're in your 20s, it's hard to imagine your 60s, much less your 80s, much less your hundreds.
Yep.
But it's not hard to get people in their 40s to do things. It's not hard to get people in their 60s to do things. So it'll be really interesting to see
That's right.
what the impact is of people like you and I that are now looking at, okay, now the urgency is there. What can I do? And it may be that, it's too late and most of it is done. But I think it's actually more likely that the decisions now are the most important, because everything else, it doesn't seem to matter what you do in your 20s.
Well, there's a sense in which it doesn't matter, because for us, the only
That's
thing
right.
that matters is the decisions we can make right now. And yeah, probably the earlier you start, the better off it is. But it's too late. So we start whenever we can. And to me, this became relevant. And maybe there's a way to get the 20-year-old motivated, is to actually be around 80-something-year-olds. That is, when your parents hit their 80s, and when people hit their 80s, and suddenly they're having a hard time just functioning, just the basic, simple functions of life are a massive challenge. And you see the kind of pain and effort and difficulty that they have to live through. You suddenly go, shit, that's me in 20 years. And I want to be in better shape than they are. And I think I can be. So, decisions we make now will matter.
And that's true with so many decisions in life, that
Yep.
it's not over if you make a wrong decision, but you're always in a better place if you're making good decisions. And so learning how to make good decisions, learning what good decisions are for you, because it's not the same for everyone, that's a key part of it. And that's what we're going to do with this inquiry in Ingenuism.
Sounds good.
All right. We'll
Thank
talk
you,
more.
Robert. We will see you next week.
Thanks, Yaron.
All right.